I win.
I didn't actually get a message, did you?
I did.
Okay, well, then we'll just go with Jonah's version of this and say that we're live right now and that I don't know how to use the chat feature here. Fair enough. Welcome to Dispatch Live. I'm Sarah Isgur. That's Jonah Goldberg. We'll have some other special guests coming a little bit later. And well, Jonah, there was some news today. But before we get to that, for those of you who are avid Advisory Opinions listeners, you'll already know this story. But for those of you that aren't, back about a month ago, there were two Supreme Court cases, one about Twitter and one about Google. And we don't really need to get the details. But the opinions were frankly kind of womp womp. They weren't that interesting. We expected them to be super interesting. So that was kind of a disappointment. Except there was this one line from Justice Jackson. And the line was, other cases presenting different allegations and different records may lead to different conclusions. And I loved it because while that sounds really obvious and simple, it seems like a lot of people need to hear that these days. And so I said that I was going to get it as a tattoo. I don't have any tattoos, so it was sort of a joke. And then Jonah, glorious Jonah, presented me with this. Well, let me get my microphone out of the way. It's incredible, Jonah. It really is.
We should clarify. I didn't drug you and take you to a tattoo parlor. It's a temporary tattoo.
Fine, it's a temporary tattoo. I have sent it to a few Supreme Court clerks, though, in the hopes that Justice Jackson will see it. It is glorious. I showed it. So Nate is very into temporary tattoos right now. He got his first one like 2 weeks ago, and he's been showing it off to everyone, but his rubbed off 2 days ago. Don't even ask. It's not okay that my son's temporary tattoo lasted for 2 weeks. I know that means I'm not scrubbing him particularly well in the bathtub. But he was telling me today he was really upset about it. And I said, but look, mommy has one now. That sent him through the roof. He was not amused that I had one and now he doesn't. So thanks, Jonah.
I thought it was an inspired, wonderful gift. You were very excited when I got it for you. And, you know, like just because it illuminates like some sort of black light where you fall down on the job as a mother, that's not my problem.
Fair, I guess, actually. All right. So Hunter Biden, it was announced, was charged with 3 federal crimes today. Sorry, I hit the mic. 2 misdemeanor tax evasion cases where he was pled guilty, agreed to plead guilty, and will receive probation. And then a felony gun charge related to the paperwork that you fill out to legally purchase a gun, in which he attested that he was not addicted to controlled substances when in fact he was. In that negotiated deal, he will get a pretrial deferment, basically, which is sort of like probation, but probation happens after you plead guilty. This is like probation beforehand. If you fulfill all the requirements, then the charge is dismissed. So it's like it never happened. You know, records would show that you were charged with it, but that, again, it would just show the charge was dismissed, not that you pled guilty or were acquitted or anything like that. Clearly highly negotiated. So, Jonah, there have been responses across the board here. Would you like to run us through some of your own thoughts before we tackle everyone else's?
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about on the, and unless people unless people misconstrue my sarcasm, Sarah's a wonderful mother. And Nate is not only is a very handsome lad, he's got very important hair. But so anyway, look, I'm not surprised by this. I think my friend Andy McCarthy was basically predicting this outcome for a very long time. I think the instant reactions were very annoying by my lights. If you actually cooperate with the Department of Justice, you often get something short of going to prison for the rest of your life, and or even for 30 days. And so I think, you know, as we talked about on the Dispatch podcast, Hunter Biden is clearly a broken guy. He's a flawed human being. He's a drug addict. We can have some sympathy because for those of us who know what happens to people and their families when they battle addiction and all that kind of stuff. But I think given that these were the charges DOJ was looking at, this does not strike me as some sort of major scandal or outrageous. I think you can make the case that it is very good news for the Biden administration in the sense that it gets some of this out of the way. I think that they were very fortunate that he didn't go to court and actually argue his Second Amendment rights, given how politically inconvenient that would be for Biden in particular and the Democrats in general. I'd be open to harsher punishments, but this just feels like it's one of these things that's sort of in the ballpark when you're cooperating with an investigation. What was his name? Chris Collins, who was a scuzzy Republican insider trader, got busted for it, paid some sort of fine, and did like a year probation or something like that. The idea that this is only the kind of deal that you'd get if you were a Democrat, I don't think washes. Where I think that it's disappointing a little bit on the merits, and it's really disappointing politically for some people, is that the real story is the Biden crime family stuff, and like what did he get paid while he was, and why, when he was Burisma, and there's these allegations that are tenuous about Biden accepting a bribe and all of these kinds of things. Poor Rudy Giuliani's witness has up and died on him. And I think there are an enormous number of people who would love to see that, Hunter Biden flipped to these other things and sold out his dad and all that kind of thing in response to these charges, and they were getting their hopes up. So I think it's wildly over politicized. But I think the comparisons to like Donald Trump and that kind of thing are really kind of hot garbage, because Donald Trump could have gotten a plea deal as well.
Would you say that other cases presenting different allegations and different records may lead to different conclusions?
I may have to get that tattoo.
No, I mean, it's literally true here, right? They're different charges with different evidence supporting them. And one of these two guys was willing to plead guilty. So right. DOJ, I don't know how to explain this to people in a way that y'all will believe me, because everyone thinks the DOJ is super politicized, when in fact, these guys have no idea how politics works whatsoever. And it's a deeply unpolitically savvy place. I mean, there's 120,000 employees, and like maybe 4 have ever worked on a campaign. Maybe an additional 3 have worked in the, on the Hill of some kind. Like, so 7 out of 120,000 have any political experience at all. If DOJ were a more politically savvy place, what they would have done today is release all the statistics in real, like at the same time that they release the Hunter Biden thing, of all of the similarly situated gun charges that have gotten probation.
Right.
And 2, they would have found a way to publicly discuss a potential plea deal that they would be willing to offer Donald Trump. For instance, sitting here not knowing everything from the inside, I would think that the Department of Justice would offer to drop the willful retention charges in exchange for guilty pleas to the obstruction, false statements charges, and offer probation on those. So plead guilty to 32 through 37 on the indictment.
Right.
And each one will come with, and it may be a little higher probation. Maybe it's 5 years probation, but regardless, this is sort of how the Department of Justice works. They're going to throw the book at you. They're going to throw it when they know they can hit you. Like, they don't bring charges unless they believe that they can win, will win at trial. But if you're willing to save the United States government the cost of a trial, by all means, they are often very, very game for that. I think my disappointment's the wrong word. My aggravation stems from the gun charge issue. You're saying that there's all these illegal guns on the street, that gun violence has become an epidemic, all of which I agree with. And then here you have a gun charge of someone illegally purchasing a gun based on the rules. And you do pretrial deferment on this?
Yeah.
I get that Hunter Biden isn't a gangbanger, and I get that he didn't do this to attempt to shoot up a school. I understand that, but either you're going to enforce these gun laws for the purpose of deterrence, for the purpose of not having people who shouldn't have guns have them. I mean, the whole thing is that you don't think someone who's addicted to controlled substances should be able to own a gun, and he did because he lied about it. Well, either that should apply to everyone or it shouldn't. Well, we didn't think Hunter Biden was going to do anything bad with the gun. Oh, so now we're just doing individual assessments of whether we really thought that was an illegal gun purchase? I think that's wild. And so for the Biden administration at this point, I think, to say that they want to pursue stricter gun laws, I don't know, it's going to ring really hollow to me now. And the U.S. attorney who brought this was appointed by Donald Trump during the Trump administration. This investigation started during the Trump administration. I believe I overlapped with it by like a month. I was not aware of it. I'm not aware that I was aware of it sitting here now. And he said that Garland, the attorney general, deferred to him completely. You already know I have beef with that because that's like literally not how the chain of command works. Garland should be signing off on things like this. So when I say the Biden administration, I don't mean that Joe Biden personally had anything to do with this. But the point still stands. Your Department of Justice carries out your policy principles and priorities, and either you think gun violence should be a priority or you don't. So yeah, that's where my aggravation.
Yeah, no, I think that's entirely fair. And just as a sort of let's go wild and talk about the Constitution for 2 seconds. Nobody in the executive branch actually has any power that isn't an extension of the president's power. So even the Merrick Garland thing where, I think you're right, where he's claiming he had nothing to do with this decision. Well, Joe Biden can claim the same thing, but at the end of the day, everybody's working as essentially a constitutional emissary of the president because it's the unitary power of the executive branches and the president. And you just don't get to say, as a constitutional matter, you had nothing to do with it because the decision not to decide is also to decide.
Yeah. I was about to tell the story about how I got in a fight with someone on Twitter about this, but frankly, y'all all can just fill in the blanks of some guy who was like, how dare you say that, that Republicans think that Joe Biden is prosecuting one of his, political enemies. And I'm like, well, literally, that's what the Constitution says.
Right.
And I was like, it says the office of the president. And Joe Biden holds that office. And he's like, yeah, but you were talking about Joe Biden personally. And I'm like, yep, that's how that works. A human person has to hold the office of the president. That is also required by the Constitution.
Right. But that is also not an argument. I mean, I don't think you're making the argument that, and so therefore he can't prosecute Trump, right? I mean, like,
nope.
I think we all agree. I mean, look, there are very few federal murder statutes, but like, let's say Trump killed a postal worker on a federal pier. Mm-hmm. We would all think that he should be prosecuted for that.
Well, not all of us, but yeah.
Yeah. All sane people who aren't high, aren't drunk on Kool-Aid would think he should be prosecuted for that. That doesn't mean he would be prosecuted because he's Joe Biden's political opponent. It means he's being prosecuted because he broke the law. And I think and I think the causality works much better the other way. Donald Trump is running in part, so it makes it more difficult to prosecute him than the other way around. I'm not saying that he's running to avoid this charge because he was running when he broke these laws. So, but anyway, you get the point.
I think all that's true. But to revisit that for just a second, I also think it's the case that it is bad for the political health of the country when a president who is currently running for re-election through his delegated powers as the chief executive is prosecuting the guy who is most likely to be running against him.
Okay, so let me ask you this, and since we're going to do this,
we're going to do this.
Where do you assign the blame for this? Do you think the blame accrues to Joe Biden, or do you think the blame accrues to Donald Trump for willingness to put the country through this? And not doing what any other politician in American history would have done, which is simply say, I'm withdrawing from the race, blah, 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 blah. Is it who is the moral aggressor here or transgressor here?
Yeah. So in a lot of civil cases, you will end up with people getting held liable as a percentage. There's like 5 defendants, and one's the guy driving the car, one's the guy who made the car, one's the guy who insured the car, and the jury is going to give each one a percentage. So that's what I would do here. It's not that I think it's all one or all the other. I think they both share some fault here. I think Donald Trump bears the lion's share for putting the country through this by not giving back the documents, because as he told Brett Baer last night, he was pretty busy and didn't want to. Just these poor criminal defense lawyers now have a new stress stream that they're going to have, which is that their client just suddenly appears on Brett Baer for 2 hours, eviscerating all their legal defenses, and instead giving a defense that, while that may make sense to a lot of people, isn't actually a legal defense.
Right.
So by saying that, he was basically saying, I have no legal defense. It was painful.
Yeah. So, but I get the concept of
I'm giving maybe certainly 60% to Trump. I may be willing to go as high as 70%.
Yes. I generally, as someone who hates everybody, I'm generally in favor of doling out parcels of blame to everybody. And I'm there's no, monocausal explanations drive me crazy and all that kind of stuff. But Trump did the crime. Let's just stipulate that for the moment, right? Trump lost the last election, refuses to admit it.
Stipulated.
Right. And the DOJ and NARA and all these guys, they gave Trump every opportunity not to be criminally prosecuted for everything. And he gave them the high hat at every turn. And now he claims the reason he had to do it was because he had pants and golf shirts in these boxes. What choice? Okay. So what if you're Jack Smith? Forget Garland and Biden for 2 seconds. If you're Jack Smith, do you have any choice but to eventually pull the trigger on prosecuting?
I agree that at some point you do, but I do think there were other things they could do. And by the way, I just want to be clear with the audience that I am stipulating guilt here. I am not actually agreeing with.
Right. We're talking about in the hypothetical case, right?
Yeah. Okay. I just want to be very clear.
I'm asserting guilt. I'm flatly asserting it.
That's fine.
Yeah,
I
my personal opinion. Yeah.
It is my job to say that an indictment does not equal evidence.
But I think evidence equals evidence. And Donald Trump has provided an enormous amount of evidence, including the fact that he has not offered any plausible defenses. And the defenses that he's offered contradict each other. So but I'm making inferences.
Stipulated.
Fair.
I agree there was some point, but I also think that there were things they could have done. Again, not that they were changing DOJ protocols to go after Trump more. In fact, probably were treading pretty lightly here. But when you're talking about the political health of the country, I think there were things that could have been done along the way. For instance, publicly saying we're offering Donald Trump a plea deal and he won't take it.
Fair. I get it. Right. They could have tried some things to force his hand to diffuse the situation.
And they could have walked the public along with them a lot more.
I think it's fair. That's fair.
And I think that Joe Biden staying totally hands off has a lot of benefits. I think it has a lot of drawbacks. I mean, you and me and others have talked privately at the Dispatch about the pardon question, right? And I think the cheese stands alone on this one, but I think it's a lot harder question than you guys do, and I get it. Donald Trump hasn't accepted responsibility. He's not Richard Nixon. Stipulated. All of that's true. I don't give a about Donald Trump. This is about the political health of the country. And maybe that means you wait for a conviction. I'm open to all of those arguments, but the F Donald Trump, let's get the SOB is totally unpersuasive to me when it comes to conversations about how this should have gone, how it should play out now, how the pardon conversation should be happening. So, and again, I think there's real arguments for the political health of the country that he shouldn't be pardoned. And I'm very open to those. But that's different than I hate the orange man.
Yeah, no, I get it. At the same time, I think a hill I'm willing to die on is that Donald Trump deserves no sympathy. right?
Stipulation.
And which which I just think is like an important point, because lots of people want to turn it into the persecution of Donald Trump.
Yeah,
He has invited all of these problems upon himself, right? Secondly, I
yes.
think
He
it's
could
really
have
important,
stopped this at any point
right?
along the way.
Which is why I think you're lowballing his share of the blame here. Particularly
Maybe
if
you're
you
right.
believe, if you take his word for why he didn't return the boxes that he just gave Brett Baer last night, he is putting the country through this because after 2 or a year and a half, he didn't have time to make sure that he wasn't sending his pants and golf shirts to the National Archives, right? Like it benefits a man nothing to lose his soul for the world. But for your khakis, I mean, like, it's just indefensible on his terms, not anybody else's. But second of all, I think, and this is a point I made in the last Friday's G-File, I think that like people like you and Rich Lowry and other people, I think you make a good faith argument for the pardon as something for national peace, national comity, national healing, all that kind of stuff. I think you're all wildly immature. I mean, premature on this. Sorry, I can't really throw the immature card, so I misspoke. But I think it's wildly premature. I think it's a gift to him to start talking about how he needs a pardon. That's what he's turning that into an issue in the primaries. You're not supposed to get a pardon until you're actually found guilty. And actually, according to I looked at the DOJ guidelines, you're not supposed to really get a pardon according to the DOJ guidelines until you served your time. And so, like, I am not like I just think it is just wildly too early for it. But the argument in theory, in the abstract, I think has a lot of credibility. It is important to distinguish that argument from the argument that Vivek the Beetle Ramaswamy is making, which is that the pardon is a way to sanction the Justice Department for prosecuting him in the first place, right?
Yeah,
That is the argument that's going on in the GOP primaries right now, is that he needs to be pardoned because what the DOJ did is outrageous, not what Donald Trump did is outrageous. And I think going forward, if we're going to have these pardon talks, a lot of people are going to have to make that very clear, because I have zero sympathy for the Vivek argument.
All right, let's get to some questions from you guys. From Fred, will Hunter Biden have to pay the unpaid taxes with penalty? He already did. That had already happened ahead of time. So there is no money owed anymore to the government, which is part of why these were misdemeanor tax charges and part of why the probation makes a lot of sense. Was Hunter's income from foreign sources? Does that mean he should have registered as a foreign agent? Did he violate FARA? Well, those are all very good questions, Ed. Here's where it gets sort of interesting. The Department of Justice is saying that those investigations aren't over. And Hunter Biden's attorneys are saying that this closes all investigations into their client. Look, the Department of Justice would know, so obviously they're right in the sense that they're the ones who would continue investigating. But they do have a problem, which is, as a lawyer, it's possible, but it would be pretty insane to agree to a plea and a pretty complicated negotiated plea deal like this if it didn't include the waterfront. Why would you plead out to stuff when there's still other pending stuff? You want it all in one bag so you can get sort of the best deals on everything that you can get. If Hunter Biden's lawyers were given assurances that that was the plea deal, this would end the plea deal, basically, if there is an ongoing investigation. So that's a very messy question that you ask. And I think we will find out more about it. And I think that actually, while DOJ has the power to continue investigating and be right about that, that Hunter's lawyers will end up being right about it if DOJ would like to have this plea deal go through. Can you talk more about the issue of Democrats not prosecuting gun charges? Yes, I can, George. And Jonah, you didn't get to talk a lot about this, so I'll give you most of the time on this. But, you know, everyone who talks about DOJ being an independent body, it's not. DOJ carries out the political will of the presidency. And this is an overly simplistic way to think about it, but like not as simplistic as you'd think. You know, guns and butter from economics, like in high school. Think of it as white collar crime and gun crimes at DOJ. you're putting resources, by which I mean the number of federal prosecutors, AUSAs, and you're moving them in any given administration onto your priorities. And so in a Democratic administration, you're going to see more AUSAs moved onto white collar crime because you can't charge it all, right? There's a million crimes out there and you've got enough to charge 200,000 crimes, let's say. So you've really got to pick and choose. Republican administrations are going to move their federal prosecutors onto those gun charges. And so you're going to see this waxing and waning of how many charges are going on in each administration. I'm fine. That's the way it works. You know, the priorities, the political priorities of the president and the attorney general are carried out through choices like that. But then I don't want to hear about how seriously you take gun violence when I'm watching the resources go shift to something else.
Yeah, I don't know the breakdown of federal gun crime stuff to state gun crime stuff, but I mean the gun crime stuff that the feds have jurisdiction over in this Hunter Biden thing are the paperwork stuff. I'm not dismissing it, right? But it's lying on a federal form is a federal crime kind of thing. But most gun crimes in terms of like pulling the trigger and shooting somebody
Totally.
in the United States are state crimes, right? And under
The
state
federal
criminal
crime that's most often going to get charged is felon in possession.
right.
That's a
And
federal crime. But like otherwise, if you did something with the gun, you're going to get charged by the state.
right. And so I think I wasn't clear about the question about Democrats not prosecuting gun crimes because I think there are two different things going on here. One is the thing you're talking about federal, what priorities does an administration make under a constrained budget, which is sort of the definition of all budgets. And the other one is all the stuff that you see with like San Francisco and New York and these places where they are ratcheting down the prosecution of gun crimes because of this argument about mass incarceration being bad, not wanting to send more young black men to jail and all that. And I think that the two things are related insofar as it is a great problem for the Democratic Party, given its internal coalition and its ideological North Stars, to deport people from the border, right? And to put young black men in prison. And the problem is that as a statistical matter, the vast majority of people who need to be deported from the border are illegal immigrants, because otherwise you can't deport them, right? But that's part of the coalition that the Democrats are trying to uphold and the arguments they're trying to hold. I think it's all comes from a sincere, fairly humane place. But the other problem is statistically, you're going to have a disproportionate number of young black men committing gun crimes in this country. And so like my friend Charlie Cook, who's, I think he would not take offense if I called him a gun nut. He's at minimum a Second Amendment enthusiast. He's been making this point for a long time, is that we kind of have on the right, we have the sort of decriminalization of gun ownership in terms of these right to carry laws and all that kind of stuff. And on the left, you have the decriminalization of gun use by prosecutors refusing to actually throw the book at people who use guns in crimes. And I think that contradiction is a much bigger problem for Democrats than it is for Republicans.
All right. And do we think that Trump tries to extend this to beyond the election? Is that possible, or is it too long? So the judge tentatively set the trial date for August 14th, right? And so there was a whole bunch of like, whoa, August 14th, like very, very unlikely. That is within the Speedy Trial Act, the 70 days from indictment. That's why that date was initially set. And look, Donald Trump could go to trial on August 14th if his lawyers bring zero motions in advance of the trial. I'll tell you why that's possible. It's very unlikely, but it's possible if Donald Trump just wants to get convicted and then make this a political case,
right,
and not worry about the legal case. If, however, he'd like to have an opportunity to be acquitted, you're going to see a bunch of motions like evidence suppression motions, attorney-client privilege stuff. You'd see a change of venue motion, potentially, all sorts of things you could throw in there that would delay it potentially. And it's not just then the judge rules on the motion, it's that then you can appeal the judge's ruling on the motion. And that could take a really long time. So is it possible for him to delay it for whatever that is, 18 months? Yeah, that's possible. The Speedy Trial Act actually is not just about the defendant's rights. It's also about the community's rights to have prosecutions brought in a timely manner and to have justice sort of meted out. So there is a limit, but 18 months wouldn't be totally crazy. All right, let's bring in Andrew Egger and Mike Warren. They say they're ready to come on. I'll believe it when I see it. There's one.
Here I am.
It's the Mike Warren. And it's about to be the Andrew Egger. Welcome, y'all. We'll sort of shift this from the Hunter Biden breaking news, I think, a little more over to the 2024 Republican field, what everyone's been doing, how they're responding. My view is that the Trump indictment was always going to help Trump in the short term and maybe really hurt him in the long term. But the Hunter Biden indictment, I mean, you gotta wonder what sort of Faustian deal Trump made, because these things always happen to him. They're so helpful. The Department of Justice, as I said, opened this Hunter Biden investigation while I was still there. I was in my 30s. And this is the week they decide to wrap it up. Are you kidding me? Terrible timing, Mike. Political.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little less sure than you are that this particularly, redounds to Trump's benefit. But I take your point, because we were discussing this earlier today, Sarah, right? The idea here is that Republican candidates, Republicans on Capitol Hill, like, they don't have to talk about Trump and his indictment anymore. This is your argument. They can just say, well, what about Hunter Biden? Hunter Biden's slap on the wrist.
The sweetheart deal.
The sweetheart deal that he got. I mean, I guess at first blush, I had the opposite reaction, which shows like maybe how little my finger is on the pulse of like where kind of Republican energies are, because I thought, well, man, this really undercuts the idea that the DOJ is in cahoots with President Biden to go after his political enemies and protect his family and his friends, because it seemed to me like a bad thing to have a guilty plea deal for Hunter Biden, and the investigation supposedly still going on. So I don't know. I mean, I find all of the Republican, maybe Andrew can speak to this, but because he was, I know, talking with a lot of these campaigns today, but I find a lot of the Republican candidates' reactions to these things sort of baffling from a political perspective. They have the opportunity to make a case for themselves and to make the case that the person they are running against for the Republican nomination, Donald Trump, is unfit. And here's sort of a perfect into that argument. And Chris Christie seems to be the only one really, taking it on with relish. So, I mean, does the Hunter Biden thing, I mean, does it give them is it a distraction really? I mean, are they really going to sort of go that path and answer all these questions? Or are they going to like kind of see that in their long-term interest, if you want to be the Republican nominee for president, you just gotta make your case against that, that Trump is unfit, that Trump is, he's under indictment, he's going to be on trial. I don't know. It just seems to me like a small distraction. And once again, a missed opportunity for Republicans who say they want to be president. Right? Like, am I crazy here?
They kind of say that sometimes, maybe. Look, if nothing else, even if you don't accept my, this means that all the 2024 candidates now pivot off of having to talk about Trump onto talking about Biden. If nothing else, Andrew, it still keeps the conversation not on them. It keeps the conversation on Trump. It keeps the conversation on comparing this to Trump. And like, if you're not the front runner, and you can't get your message to break through and to get out there, there's no hope of becoming the front runner. I mean, the Tim Scott Barack Obama kerfuffle is a good example. I bet not many of you saw the Tim Scott Barack Obama kerfuffle, despite the fact that Tim Scott's team did everything they could. They tweeted about it. They did interviews about it. They did Fox News Sunday about it. It was in the Wall Street Journal and Washington Post and Politico. And instead, we're not talking about it, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right about that element of things. And even on kind of the merits of what Mike was talking about, I do think we haven't seen these candidates want to come charging out to talk about Trump's indictment. But when you talk to some of these people's, strategists, there is a sense that like right now, our number one priority is building our personal brand. But like once we get to the point where we are actually needing to take Trump on directly, this would in theory be one of the things that we would hit, is this kind of indictment. And I do think that this Hunter news puts a lot of these campaigns in a real double bind where it's not super clear what the best thing to do is, because the Republican base hates Hunter Biden. They'd see him as like the kind of avatar of all of these kind of double standards that loom very large in their minds, that he's been able to get away with all of this alleged corruption that Republicans have been talking about forever. Republicans love to pivot to Hunter for this reason, but they now can't hardly help but exactly parrot Trump's talking points because of that, because you have Trump coming out and talking about the sweetheart deal, you have DeSantis coming out and talking about the sweetheart deal, and Tim Scott coming out and calling it a slap on the wrist with kid gloves and all these sorts of things that you have to say because the base doesn't like Hunter. But every time you say that kind of thing, all you do is pour more and more kind of fuel onto Trump's fire of, well, and this is why they're going after me in particular, because of this double standard. So it's even they don't want to be talking about this at all, period. But even kind of internal to the conversation of like, how should they be talking about it when they do? There aren't a lot of easy wins for the other Republicans to have at this point.
Look, I mean, the best metaphor I can use for this analogy is that when I'm in Texas, I will barely speak to people from the city of Dallas. They are horrible, snobby, New York wannabe, terrible humans. But outside Texas, it's Texas, man, and I will defend them with everything I've got, right? So Republicans, when it comes to Hunter Biden, can't be seen shooting from the left into the tent. They've got to shoot outward. And even a Chris Christie, who I think has done a really talented job going after Trump with that very fine line of voters not wanting to hear bad stuff about their own team. This puts even him in a bit of a bind, I think, because he can't say like, no, hold on, guys, this is different because Donald Trump wasn't willing to plead. And so the Hunter Biden thing's actually okay. No, because at some point, Republican voters are like, whose team are you on?
But Sarah, I mean, to push back a little bit on whether Chris Christie is in a bind. I mean, whatever. I mean, I don't know if Chris Christie actually thinks he will be the Republican nominee for president, but he's sort of doing this campaign on his own terms. But I'm thinking about something that Andrew just said about, the way, because I've heard this as well from Republican campaigns, now is the time that we define ourselves, and then there will be the time after we define ourselves that we run against Trump. We will do all the things that you are asking us about when that time comes, which strikes me as, I'm having 2016 flashbacks of covering the Republican primary in 2016, but it strikes me as like a fatal flaw in all these campaign strategies, which is to sort of think that they can dictate the terms of the campaign instead of sort of sensing opportunities and seizing on them. And I would say, look at the two Republican candidates for president, not named Donald Trump, who in the last week have gotten attention. Maybe it's been good attention for them. Maybe it's been bad attention. It's been Chris Christie and Vivek Ramaswamy. Why? Because they didn't say, well, Trump got indicted this week, but what I really wanted to talk about was the thing that I wanted to talk about. they sort of did their own spin. Chris Christie sort of saying, see what I've been saying? We're going to nominate this guy. He's just got indicted. And Vivek, in his own way, again, I don't think it's like sort of incoherent strategy, but he basically got a bunch of attention by saying, hey, everybody should agree to pardon Donald Trump. And he got attention for it. And that to me seems to be not trying to control the narrative yourself by sticking to your plan and your strategy, but instead sort of sensing and being dynamic and nimble with whatever the story of the week is, and using it to advance your own interests. And that's not something any of the other Republicans seem capable of or interested in doing.
Campaigning is body surfing. You've got to see the wave right before it crests and get in it and on it if you want to move forward. And that's hard to do. But yeah, Nikki Haley says she's giving a major foreign policy address on China on Friday. What? Read the room. Yeah, Jonah?
I take the point. I go back and forth on this myself about this wait for your moment thing, and the problem is that it seems to me this idea of this is the moment where we define ourselves. I agree with Mike entirely. Like, you're not defining yourself, right? There's no one. You're remaining undefined because no one's hearing your name or seeing your picture or talking about you in the slightest, except in one regard. I keep going back. I think I've written about it. I've talked about it on the podcast before, but the parable, the drowning man, he prays to God. A boat comes, says, hop on in, I'll save you. And he's like, no, I'm waiting for God to save me. And boat goes, and then a helicopter comes, whatever. Finally, he goes to heaven after he drowns and says to God, where were you? I thought you were going to save me. He says, what are you talking about? I said a boat, I sent a helicopter, whatever, right? God has been sending the Republican Party opportunities to divorce themselves from Donald Trump with incredible regularity for years. 2 impeachments, January 6th, the Mar-a-Lago raid. You can go down, like beating up on the Gold Star moms. I mean, pick your poison, right? There are all these moments. And I understand your argument, which is that if you pick a moment to pick a fight with them and you don't actually convince voters to go with you, you end up like, Jeff Flake or Corker or whatever, and you lose a constituency and you're out of the game. The problem with that is that if Nikki Haley, or Tim Scott, or any of these people wait until the next Trump scandal and then say, now this is outrageous, I can no longer have anything to do with this man, he's unfit for office, no one's going to believe that you're doing it out of anything like this thing called conviction, because the first thing they're going to say is, well, wait, so this other stuff was okay, the porn star, the impeachment, all that kind of stuff. And so by not acting, you're acting. By not weighing in, you are defining yourself as someone who is utterly deferential to Donald Trump for political purposes. And then the only time you'll turn on him is when you think you can get away with it. And that may be necessary given the alternatives that people can figure out right now, but it sucks. And it's just not particularly like, I don't say, oh, I see. They're going to wait for that one moment when that what's the thing in the playground that goes really fast and you get on and boys do horrible violence to themselves on. You wait for that one moment where you can jump on and not be knocked off or spin. Like, it's too late for a lot of these people. They all seem very beta because they're so terrified of actually picking a real fight, except for Chris Christie right now. I mean, even Asa Hutchinson, who I have a soft spot in my heart for, he seems like a disappointed grandpa more than like a guy who's actually kind of running for the job. And so they're defining themselves by not defining themselves.
And I say
That's why
one
I think
thing
the
about
electability issue is key, because you can say you may love Donald Trump and his policies. We don't even have to get into whether they were good or bad or failed or worked. He can't win. So if you want any of those policies put into practice, you're gonna have to find someone who can win the 2024 election. It's shocking that really Ron DeSantis is tiptoeing around it. I think he will start making it more forcefully. I think he's laying the groundwork for it. Chris Christie, is taking a slightly different tact, but it gets to the same point. But then everyone else, I literally don't know what their strategy is other than the exact same one from 2016, which is like, no, Donald Trump will take care of himself. Sorry.
Can I say one thing about Nikki Haley in particular? Because on the one hand, she has had maybe the most incoherent response to a lot of this stuff, just kind of like weird timing on a lot of the statements she's put out. Waited a long time after Trump said he was going to be indicted before she, made her statement saying it was troubling. And then like an hour after she made her statement, the actual indictment dropped and she had to kind of walk that statement back, say the allegations were not good. It seemed like he'd acted recklessly, but then she said maybe she'd pardon him. So all that was very strange. But to the point about this like China address, I think it really speaks to the bind that all these candidates are in, because there's a lot of insane news happening about China right now, right? I mean, the Wall Street Journal has broken a couple of stories just this month about China putting, new military capabilities in Cuba. New information about spying capabilities they're having there, and maybe even a military, training facility that they're going to fund there for a joint facility for China and Cuba in Cuba. And so, under ordinary circumstances, if it were not for like this insane Trump steamroller that you can't really do anything about and nobody knows how to deal with, it would be the perfect time for a major China policy address. And these campaigns know that this kind of stuff is at least in theory a strength for them. She was UN ambassador, she has the foreign policy experience. And so like a campaign that Nikki Haley ends up winning, you would think is a campaign where she can make you notice that kind of thing, right? And so of course she's trying, and she has to try, but it just kind of speaks to the way that he sucks all of the oxygen out of every room that he's in. And maybe there isn't a really winning way for these other candidates to deal with that phenomenon.
All right, let's get to some questions. If Trump were pardoned with the condition that he not run for president again, how would that be enforced? Gentleman's agreement or some legal barrier? Yeah, there's no legal enforcement. The Constitution lays out the only requirements for running for president, and not being Donald Trump isn't one of them. So, yep, totally unenforceable.
But we know Donald Trump always keeps his agreements. So I think you can take that to the bank.
Yeah.
Can I say that I hate that? Like that possible thing, like, we can make this all go away. Like that's the one thing that actually feels like really grisly and kind of to really combine the political and the legal elements like that. I really kind of hope that does not take place.
Can Trump
take it in a heartbeat, but I agree with you. It's gross.
Yeah. Can Trump use his difficulty finding adequate counsel grounds to delay the trial? Absolutely not. He has counsel. You don't get to wait for your OJ style dream team to move to trial. If you have a lawyer who is barred in the state of Florida, you good to go, son. So that's a no. Also interesting because criminal defense lawyers, even civil to a lesser degree, but criminal defense lawyers, once you appear in the case, you actually can't leave on your own accord. You would have to get your client's permission, get the court's permission. I'm not saying that like when one of these lawyers tries to leave that the judge is going to force them to continue, but she could, because for this exact reason, there's not going to be a delay in the trial because you can't find adequate counsel once you got one. So that's fun.
But just what quick informational thing. We don't know who the lead criminal lawyer is going to be in this yet, right?
Look, Blanche and Chris Keiss have both appeared and said they are permanent counsel in this case. So
okay, I didn't know that. I thought it was still up in the air. Okay.
Oh, I mean, clearly they want someone else, but they're in it now.
So can they do sort of like Ben Affleck in Good Will Hunting, retainer, and just ask for some?
Do you
crazy
remember the Chris
money?
Keiss story? He asked for, I think it was $3.5 million as a retainer.
Yeah.
Now, again, I want to be clear. The way a retainer would normally work in a legal case is that, sure, you get the $3.5 million, which guarantees that you will get paid if you do $3.5 million.
Right, you earn it down. Right.
Yeah, that's right. You earn it down. So if Trump fired you on the first week, you don't then keep $3.5 million. You keep your 5 billable hours at $1,000 an hour or whatever he's charging. It's been in Trump's favor to stay in the news cycle. Is it still? Or does it also keep in mind of those who come out to vote against him? It's the primary first. Mike, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it is good for Donald Trump to be in the news when he's running for the Republican nomination. I mean, that just seems to be a fact. Although I would say that, look, what is the point of winning the nomination if you're on your way to potentially losing the general election by an even wider margin than in 2020? Because it does sort of, third time is not going to be the charm with those sort of Republican leaning independent voters that he started to lose in 2020, and he almost certainly has lost more of since January 6th and all the rest of it. So, in a Republican primary, I don't think it really hurts him, but yes, the primary comes first, but it's not like everybody's brains do an Etch-a-Sketch at the end of the primary and the general election. It's like, oh wait, now who is this Donald Trump guy again?
Yeah, but they do a little bit in the sense that it feels a long time ago. It kind of gets baked in, and it's funny, whenever you look at only one of these guys in isolation, it feels very 2016 in the sense that you're like, well, that person can't win. 70% of voters say Joe Biden is too old to be elected president again. Well, clearly Joe Biden can't win until you look at the word cloud. When you ask independent voters, what is the word that they most closely associate with Donald Trump? This is a family program, so I'll just say a-hole was very high.
Is that good for a general election?
Yeah, but it's the crypt keeper versus the a-hole.
Yeah,
You've got to pick, like, one of these guys is going to be president. It feels very Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I think the great sort of vision into Donald Trump's problems in the general from the Brett Baer interview was Brett asking a completely legitimate, serious, in some ways softball question, which was, what are you going to do? What are you going to say to those suburban women who didn't vote for you in 2020, that you lost in 2020, that they're going to get them to vote for you in 2024? And he immediately went all in on, well, look, first of all, I didn't lose in 2020, and completely did the relitigate the stuff. And there's this thing, Sarah can probably get my back on this. There's this thing, to speak in sweeping generalizations and stereotypes, that really annoys women about men. And it's when men are idiots about arguing about stupid things that don't matter, like who drank the last beer, and they can't let go of it and they can't move on. Why can't we just have a nice time? Why do you have to obsess about this kind of thing? That's how Donald Trump comes across at best when he gives those kinds of answers. And I think that's the kind of thing, like he's going to fall for the bait time and time and time again about claiming that the 2020 election was stolen when he runs in the general. If he runs in the general.
Indeed. Whenever Andrew is on, can he go over, pick a drink and pour, perhaps describing his choice? If I'm late to this suggestion, I apologize, but I feel like it's an obvious one. Andrew, it is kind of stupid. You have this bar cart behind you for every Dispatch Live, and yet we never see you taking advantage of the great bar cart you've got back there.
Well, I pour before.
Let's see what you got.
I'm just drinking rum. It's literally rum.
I thought I was going to call him out
rum
on that, and he's actually just,
Yep.
actually is doing it.
Yep. Look at all those fancy bottles. No, it's just rum.
Ugh.
It's like warm rum. That's what you're
No,
drinking.
there's a big old rock in it. That'd be a big pour with no ice.
What is it like? What kind of rum?
Kraken is the brand. Are we doing this right now? Do we need to do the guided tour? I kind of wanted to say something about that electability question. Am I allowed to wait? Am I allowed to jump back to that?
Not now. Okay, actually, maybe you guys can help me with this, because Bill says that Jonah pronounced Vivek wrong, that it rhymes with cake.
Right. I learned that from Edgar.
Wait, but how do you?
Vivek.
Vivek.
I think I said it wrong. So,
But I probably did too.
Everybody says it wrong. I watched a woman in Iowa introduce him. she's had so many nice things to say about him, and she's had his name 3 different ways in like 90 seconds.
Did you call him Todd? That would be awesome. Just like really get it wrong.
It was Vivek. She got it right once, and then Vivek, and then Vivek was the third.
Just covering the
Okay.
water.
Okay. I mean,
Okay.
it actually bothers me that Jonah still pronounces Kamala's name wrong, but I've given up because it's been whatever it's been now, 3 years together, and like it is what it is.
I still can't say the word compass without people making fun of me. I cannot say it the way normal people say it.
Wait, what? Say it again, Jonah.
Compass.
The thing
Compass.
that finds true north. Yeah, I'm not going to say it again.
It's a compass.
I can't. I don't hear it. Everybody like Steve.
Wait, you don't hear that we're saying it differently, or you don't hear yourself sounding?
I don't
stupid?
hear me saying it wrong. It just does not register. It's like,
Do you hear the difference between compass and compass?
I guess, yeah, sure.
You,
Yeah.
you need to carry around like what was his name? Tobias on Arrested Development, and record yourself saying it throughout the day and listen back to it so you can see what you can hear
I
what
blew
we
Yeah,
are.
myself.
The thing is, I'd have to care a lot more than I actually do.
Jonathan comes in with the hot take here. At least Jonah doesn't say dispatch.
Thank you,
Fair.
Jonathan.
Fair enough.
That's right.
Okay. I want to experiment with something here with our last 3 minutes. Lightning round. Who in the 2024 Republican primary had the best week?
Best week, as in starting last week.
Correct. Tuesday to Tuesday.
Oof.
It feels
I mean,
like a trick question.
Yeah, I know. Like, I feel like do you have the answer, Sarah? And you're like
This
hiding
is the
it from
Laughlin
us?
group. Yes, but
like-
I'm going to wait and then tell you you're all wrong.
Special
I'm
code.
holding a number of fingers behind my back. What is the correct number?
That's right.
I mean, I can't think of anybody other than Donald Trump, which is insane to say for a guy who was indicted this past week.
See, I'm not trying to answer the actual question. I'm trying to answer what I think Sarah wants, right? Because this is like what is in her head. So it's going to be something. I'm going to say Mike Pence.
All right, Andrew.
I was actually also going to say Pence, and I think the obvious correct answer is Trump. But the one thing I was going to say about Pence is that he is the one guy who is who at least is in keeping with his theory of the case to talk about these indictments and things like this, because his whole thing is the Trump presidency was great, but there are all of these deficiencies with the guy in terms of his disrespect for the Constitution and all of those sorts of things. And he's equipped to kind of talk about all those things. I think he has all kinds of horrible deficiencies that are unrelated to that theory of the case. And I think what his theory of the case is doesn't necessarily matter very much, because every Republican voter hates him for one reason or another. But I do think he's been sweating a little less than some of those other ones out there.
Jonah, why do you think I would have picked Pence?
Because it sounds clever. I don't actually have any idea why you'd pick Pence.
Okay, well, I don't know what this means, but I've known Mike Warren longer than all of you like combined, and Mike's right. Obviously, the answer's Trump.
Well, but you
Wait a second. Now I'm reconsidering my answer. Well, this is Larry Elder erasure here. We didn't even mention Larry.
We just spent the whole entire show talking about how this week was good for Trump. I thought this was like a silver medal question.
Exactly. I thought you were like trying
I
to be.
thought that one of y'all would come up with a clever answer that would be persuasive, but the Pence answer was totally unpersuasive. I might have entertained a Chris Christie answer, because he needs Donald Trump to have the oxygen in order for his strategy to work. And Chris Christie's needs to get to that debate stage. And so, and by that Texas two-step, Chris Christie had a great week. It looks like he's very much on track to get on the debate stage. I would have been happy with that answer. Mike Pence is just a terrible answer.
Are you going to make me repeat the grade, Sarah?
I was just trying to Kobayashi Maru this because I just assumed that you were not looking for Donald Trump because, again, we talked about it for half the show.
I was looking for you to actually tell me what you thought.
We're not clever enough, apparently. We're not clever. We're not
You're
thoughtful.
all
question.
husbands is what that is.
I
That's
take it up with the
husbands
commissioner.
trying to be like, where do you want to go to dinner? Oh shit, where does she want to go to dinner? And for that, you all get points for being wonderful husbands and work spouses. All right. And with that, thank you all so much for joining us tonight and for being members, for supporting us, for your great questions and comments and feelings. And I'll just leave you with this one thought. Other cases presenting different allegations and different records may lead to different conclusions. And to everyone on Twitter who thought this was a real tattoo, oh my God.
I thought it was a real tattoo.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Later. Is everyone just gone?
We all